truly a pleasure to gather with you here tonight at Maple Grove, a place where memory is not still but alive, where stories rest in the earth and rise again through those who are willing to tell them. Before we begin, we pause just for a moment to honor a life remembered here on these grounds. This evening is dedicated to Gregory Klimov, a man whose journey carried him from the rigid ranks of a Soviet officer to the uncertain freedom of a defector. In choosing truth over comfort, he stepped into a new world, one where his voice could finally be heard. Through his writings, Klimov explored the hidden architecture of power, the unseen forces that shape societies, govern thought, and test the human spirit. His life reminds us that the greatest battles are often not fought on open fields, but within the mind and within the conscience. And in many ways, that spirit echoes in the story we gather to celebrate tonight. This evening, we celebrate a different kind of story, one not carved in stone, but bound in pages, a story of shadows and choices, of justice and consequence, and of the timeless question, who truly stands on which side of the line? We are honored to welcome Alex Segura, whose work has carved a bold and compelling place in modern storytelling. With Enemy of My Enemy, he brings us into the world of Daredevil, a figure who walks that delicate boundary between light and darkness. And guiding tonight's conversation is Charles Soule, a master storyteller whose voice has helped shape that very world. There's something deeply fitting about a book launch here. Cemeteries, after all, are not only places of endings, they are places of reflection, of meaning, of stories waiting to be rediscovered. And tonight we add another story to that tradition. Not one of the past, but one that speaks vividly to our present. On behalf of the Friends of Maple Grove, thank you for being here and for supporting literature, for supporting community, and for continuing the timeless act of gathering together to share in story. So settle in, enjoy the conversation, and let yourself be carried, because the best stories, like the finest memories, never truly leave us. Welcome, and let the evening begin. Thank you all.
That was the best
conversation
I've ever had. Can't beat that.
I'll be signing over there.
Yeah. So Alex, we've known each other for a long time.
Yes. Once upon a time, I was Charles's publicist at DC.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
So it's been great to see you, your rise and the transition into becoming an author for yourself and all the, the incredible work that you've done. And this one is interesting, Daredevil, Enemy of My Enemy, because as was alluded to by some of the people that we just heard, I'm also a Daredevil writer.
Yes.
And so reading this book was interesting because I've written a lot of Daredevil's comic adventures in the last sort of chunk of years. And so I have a real lens on him, the way that I tell stories.
How long was your run? It was
4 years. It's 2015 and then into 2018. And so I wrote like a lot. I'm a former attorney, and like there's a lot of things about Daredevil that sort of have always clicked with me, even since I was a little kid. So that's the first question I have: is like, was Daredevil always like a big get for you, the chance to tell a story with him?
And you were, I think you were the first attorney to write Daredevil.
I was,
right? So
yeah,
and
still.
Yeah, still. I was always a Spider-Man and X-Men kid. Those were my Marvel comics. And Daredevil felt almost like a little bit more adult, more complicated, he was much more of a gray character, more conflicted. And I started picking up around Anna Senti's run, and she came in right after Frank Miller, so she was really dealt a hand of cards. If you're not a comics person, Frank Miller wrote a story called Born Again that basically demolished Daredevil's status quo in a good way. It's a great story. But then Annie had to kind of pick that up and reestablish the character. I love Daredevil because it felt like the crime novels I was reading as a fan. It felt much more noir, much more hard-boiled. And while he had superhero stuff, Spider-Man would show up, the Avengers would show up, it was still very grounded. And I really resonated with me as a reader and as a kid. And I kind of just went from there. And so, I wrote the illustrated history of Daredevil in addition to this book. And it was one of those things where I was like, yeah, I can do that because I've read all these stories as a fan, and that really informed the novel as well.
I mean, you can really tell, and so I kind of was, at least some part of this conversation will be getting into the weeds a little bit on Daredevil and Daredevil continuity.
We'll try to keep it mainstream.
Yeah, sort of. Are there like Daredevil heads in the room? People who like, okay, I figured there'd be some who kind of like know it backwards and forwards. And so I certainly am, you certainly are. And one of the things that was really interesting about this book is the way that it plays sort of fast and loose with the comics continuity. Because as I was reading it, one of the questions I had in my head was, when in the Daredevil storytelling is this set? Because it alludes to things like Born Again,
Right.
but then you get a reference to something out of Chip Zdarsky's run, who wrote it after I did, and then you get a reference to something out of like Brian Bendis' New Avengers run, which is like, so it's all over the place,
Right.
basically. And so my question is, how did you approach the existing storytelling that people know? And because it's not just the big beats, there's like deep cuts and stuff in there too.
Yeah.
And then choosing a moment in Daredevil's life to set the story.
I think I took advantage. So the novels exist in their own continuity, they're their own canon basically. So I took advantage of that, and like you said, played a little fast and loose. But in my mind, it happens right around, the sweet spot is when you started reading it. So for me, it kind of happens around the Dan Chichester, the Weeks run, or right before the Bendis run, because when Bendis starts on Daredevil, he basically topples the Kingpin, and you kind of deal with that, and his identity is revealed, spoiler alert. There's a lot of stuff that happens that kind of unmoors Daredevil, so that's kind of where it happens. But I was like, if it's its own continuity, I can reference Elektra being Daredevil, I can reference all these other things, but the big broad strokes like Born Again and those stories still happen in the right order, as far as I can see it. But that's a challenge. You want it to be cool for the hardcore fans who pick it up and like us and can say, oh, that's what he's referencing, but you want it to be as, appealing to someone who's maybe watched the show or knows the character very generally. They can pick up the book and not feel lost, and that was the hope. And to tell a story, the first thing I did when I got the assignment was I made a list of what are the essential elements of a Daredevil classic story. And for me, it's the Kingpin, the Punisher, Ben Urich, Karen Page in some way, like echoes of Karen or Karen being in the story, and Matt Murdock being messy, like just making bad choices in the name of justice, but also at the expense of his friends, his personal relationships, his professional relationships, Foggy, his best friend. So once I had that list, I started to figure out, well, what are the things that maybe haven't been done before? And we were talking just before this that I was really surprised that this hadn't been done before, in terms of like the Punisher being on trial for murdering or trying to kill the Kingpin. So.
Yeah, which actually brings me to my next question that I wanted to ask about, which is, so I'm, as we've already established, I was an attorney, and one of the big elements of a lot of Daredevil stories is courtroom stuff, legal dramas, that kind of deal. And for me, all that stuff came pretty naturally because of my professional background. You, as far as I know, never went to law school.
No.
So how did you approach there's a lot of courtroom scenes and sidebars and all interrogatories and all the things that happen.
Yeah.
How did you approach the procedural elements?
I'm blessed that my wife is a lawyer.
Hey, sure are.
She's a great lawyer. She's very smart.
What's your practice area?
She does nonprofit law. She does custody law. She's at a nonprofit that represents children in custody. It's really heavy, intense work.
Sure.
So, but she was able to kind of say, no, that can't. I would talk to her. I'd say, could this happen? Like, there's a moment, without spoiling anything, you always want that courtroom aha moment where it's like there's a twist, and there is one later. And I was like, I don't even know can they do this.
Yeah.
And she explained, she was like, well, they can only do this if X and Y. And so she was very helpful with that. So.
I'm pretty sure I know exactly the moment you were referencing, and when it came across, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then a few paragraphs later, you explained it away in a way that was.
Well, good. It passed this contest.
Yeah. I mean, I think whenever you're dealing with legal dramas of any kind, there's always some push and pull between the way it actually works and the way that it needs to on the page, because I don't know how many trials you've been to, but they're boring.
Yeah.
They're incredibly boring.
I had jury duty for like a month, and it was very tedious.
Yes.
We didn't have a 12 Angry Men moment at the end where there was one juror who refused to go the way of the rest of the jury. And so that was interesting, but you're talking about like 20 minutes of interesting in a month-long experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So finding a way to dramatize it is challenging. But you had all the firepower you could possibly need in terms of you seem to work in almost every single character in Daredevil's orbit and his rogues galleries. Was that a conscious, you're just gonna put everything in there that you can, find a story that will let you use like Silvermane and all these people?
Well, I knew, once the Kingpin dies, the rats are going to come out and start fighting for his kingdom. And so that was a great opportunity to play with the underworld characters. And I tried to keep it very grounded. Like, I didn't use Stiltman. I've already gotten a few emails about Stiltman. Where's Stiltman? Where is the Jester? Yeah.
Does anyone know who Stiltman is? Okay,
Yeah.
Stiltman, for those who don't know, is a man who has gigantic robot stilts. And he can make himself be very tall, and he uses that incredible superpower to break into second-story windows of buildings so he can steal stuff. That is an actual super villain. I was going to say hero.
Yeah.
I mean, he's some people's hero.
And there's a guy called the Jester who is like
Yeah.
a Jester.
There's a guy called Leapfrog,
Right.
who who dresses as a frog and can just kind of jump pretty well. He's a
So I
good
tried to
jumper.
avoid the kind of sillier villains,
Yeah.
more like Silver Agey villains, and focus on the underworld villains. But that's a wide, that's a long
Absolutely
list,
it is.
so, yeah.
Absolutely it is.
So you have like Silvermane, you have Black Tarantula, with some deep cuts there.
Yeah. So you mentioned, the sort of the Silver Age versus. I think for most Daredevil fans, Frank Miller's
Right.
run is the defining moment when Daredevil turned from kind of a silly, almost an also-ran character at Marvel to becoming this grittier. It was a very realistic, dark take on his life and what his deal was. And it feels like you're drawing from that version of Daredevil for sure.
Right.
But at the same time, there's still like sort of echoes of the wildness of the stuff before, which is fun. How do you sort of reconcile those two types of Daredevil stories, I guess? I mean, is one real for you and one isn't, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it was interesting to read all the Daredevil stuff at once. Like, as fans, you're with a title for a little while, then you kind of fade away and come back and like put it all together. But it doesn't make sense as one whole narrative just because it's been running for so long. So the benefit of the novel is you can kind of cherry pick the stories that mean the most, like Born Again or Man Without Fear, which is a great Frank Miller Rita Jr. Origin story. So it was really like which stories count the most to me in terms of this version. But I did want to have some of that surprising Silver Agey bonker stuff because it was fun. It's fun to read, and I started to appreciate it more reading it now. Because as a kid you're like, well, that's not cool. The Frank Miller stuff is cool, but the Silver Age stuff is fun, and I like that more as I get older.
So some of the other things that are prominent about Daredevil as a character is that he's blind. Matt Murdock was blinded when he was 12. Radioactive waste splashed on him, and unlike in real life where you'd be dead, Matt Murdock, he was blinded, but he was given enhanced senses, so he can see and smell and hear in a way, and he has this sort of radar sense, almost like the way a bat sees, that enables him to navigate and fight and swing around the city and all that stuff. And so when I picked up the novel, I was very interested to see how you were going to approach that element of it, because it always, when I was writing the comics, it was always very much on my mind to really try to get into the headspace of somebody whose sensory apparatus is so extreme and is experiencing the world in a way that we do not, and then the flip side of that too is that always reminding myself that he's blind. Because he can't see colors, he can't see the phase of the moon and all those things.
Screens, it's very
Yes, exactly. So how did you have to when I was doing it, I literally had a Post-it nearby saying Murdock is blind, so I wouldn't forget. How did you approach both the sensory and the blindness elements?
Yeah, I think the challenge with Daredevil's powers is that they could be overwhelming. The idea that he can hear a conversation that's happening 2 blocks from here, or he can smell what you had for dinner yesterday. These things that you can overwhelm the reader with detail. And and it's also, comics is such a visual medium, you can a lot of that, not to minimize your experience, but a lot of it can fall on the artist in terms of how they reflect what Daredevil's experiencing. So I had to figure out how do you relay that with prose and how do you do it judiciously, because I'm not an overly descriptive prose writer. Like, my prose is pretty sparse. I want the reader to kind of make the picture in their mind. And also, that's not my experience. It's not my lived experience. So you want to be thoughtful and honest about how you portray it. But Daredevil's also not your typical blind person, because he's got this, in addition to being his his senses being enhanced, he's got this radar sense, which is basically he can see in terms of like he can make out shapes. And so it's a lot of stuff going on, really, in terms of describing his powers. And so I thought the best way to do it was with concrete examples. So a lot of the book explains to you in detail what he's experiencing. Like you could hear Bill, making a phone call two blocks away, and he can also kind of widen his power, which doesn't happen a lot in the comics, but was really useful in the novel, in that he can kind of turn up the volume and spread a wider range of what he's picking up. And he's also, if you didn't know, Daredevil was trained by a ninja called Stick.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in Daredevil's history, but Stick basically taught Daredevil how to focus his power. And so that gives you a lot of, runway in terms of how he experiences them. So that was helpful.
One thing I noticed that I thought was funny and great is you many times remarked upon what people were eating or what they had eaten, because Daredevil can like smell their breath and stuff like that. So he knows like somebody had a chicken parm for lunch and all that
It
kind
just
of
feels
stuff.
overwhelming to have it. I couldn't survive.
Right. I mean, I think as we know, he was trained to, because when he was 12 and it just happened, it was very overwhelming for him, and he kind of figures it out. So, You clearly wrote the book for people who had, for both the Daredevil people and also people who had never read a Daredevil, like didn't know anything about the character. And so I thought you did a very good job in the beginning of the book of setting it all up for somebody. And because, I know this stuff backwards and forwards, but even I was like entertained by remembering what happened with Daredevil. Was there ever a time when you were just like, I'm not gonna worry about that. I'm just gonna write this book and assume, just jump in?
I didn't want it to feel like I was giving somebody a Wikipedia entry. Like, I didn't want the info exposition dumps. I like character through action. So you see Matt as a lawyer, and you see that he's a lawyer, and then you realize, oh, this guy can literally hear a pin drop. The opening scene starts with, you could hear a pin drop. The only person who could hear a pin drop in that room is Matt, because he has these abilities. And so you show who the character is through the actions and through what he's doing. And then you meet Foggy, and then Foggy, you understand, is his law partner. And so it's kind of like a gradual, peeling back of who this character is through the story happening, as opposed to, this is Matt Murdock, he is also Daredevil, as opposed to the kind of the basic Wikipedia of it all. And, my previous novels were helpful in that regard because I wrote 2 murder mysteries set in comics, in the comic book industry. And one thing my editor said, he was like, you don't have to fanboy out. You don't have to get too into the weeds of comic book history and the lore. People want a good story. And if you can sprinkle in the details of the character, that will get them through the story. And so I wanted the reader to know enough to enjoy the novel, but not feel like they're reading the back of a Marvel trading card.
Yeah.
Because we would love to do that, and I did that many times. But the hope is that the book appeals to people who read thrillers and mysteries and maybe know who Daredevil is and want to tap into that, but they aren't in the weeds like we are.
Right. So superheroes, many superheroes have a secret identity, right? Matt Murdock is the civilian identity of Daredevil, and Daredevil is the superhero identity of Daredevil. That was a great sentence. I should write that down.
You're a writer.
Yep. So in the novel, you change the POV basically, like on the page in the attribution. So when it's Matt talking to his law partner, it's like Matt said this, Matt did that. But when he's in costume, it's Daredevil did this, Daredevil did that. Do you think Matt Murdock sees them as 2 different people? Is sort of question 1. And then question 2 is, there are moments when Matt is talking to somebody who knows that Daredevil is Matt Murdock, or he takes his mask off in a scene? Did you start changing? I don't remember. I wasn't tracking it closely enough. But you
I don't remember either.
if you were changing attributions midway? But maybe that's not as interesting. That's rarely BS. But the first part, in terms of how he sees himself as a character, as a person, is.
Yeah, I mean, the crux of we should zoom out and just kind of give the general plot of the story. So, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, Matt Murdock is a defense attorney, one of the big New York defense attorneys by day. By night, he is a vigilante known as Daredevil. He has these powers. And early on in the book, he realizes that the Kingpin, who is basically the mob boss of New York City, has been murdered. And in some ways, Matt feels a great relief because he's like, I didn't even have to do it, and he's gone, and I don't have to deal with this person anymore. Because you also learn that the Kingpin destroyed Matt's life because the Kingpin knows Matt and Daredevil are the same person. So And that's a reference to a comic book story, but it's also easy to kind of understand. But then we also realize that the main suspect in the murder of the Kingpin is Frank Castle, who is the Punisher. And the Punisher is a different quote-unquote superhero because he is judge, jury, and executioner. He kills the criminals. He doesn't like Matt throw them in prison and then let justice go its way. He is the decider. And on some level, Matt feels a great relief because these two problems of mine have now resolved themselves. But he's also a lawyer and he's a great believer in justice. And so as he starts to realize that maybe things aren't as open and shut as he first thought, that maybe somebody else has had a part in the murder of the Kingpin, he decides to defend the Punisher in court. And then at night, he puts on this devil suit and starts figuring out what really is going on. And so, to me, I don't think he treats it as two different things. I think he struggles a lot with, like, I'm bending the law and breaking the law in many ways as Daredevil, and I'm breaking the law, having these abilities where I can hear what the juror is, hear the juror's heartbeat. Yep. So I can tell when they are excited or when they think someone's lying. So he's already in the gray area, and I think it's a question of how gray does he want to get, and what is he willing to do to find justice. Like his quest is always to seek justice. And sometimes it's not the clearest way. And so it's complicated, but I think they're one and the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think it's like a psychosis for them to but like it's very weird. If you're literally thinking you're two different people, it's kind of a problem. Yeah, it's strange. It's Darth Vader, Anakin territory.
Yeah.
It's probably not great. I should also say that like there's no way that Matt should be practicing law.
The ethics are like out the window.
Yes, it's insane. It was one of the things that I when I was writing the run, his secret identity had been exposed, as you mentioned, by Brian Bendis, and other writers had sort of run with that. And so by the time I got the character, he had been thoroughly disbarred. So he was no longer practicing law, and part of it was that he had because his identity was out there, right? And so it was sort of priority number one to put that back in the bottle so that I could write him as an attorney, because otherwise, why did I even get a law degree?
But I thought it was great that you didn't feel the need to explain it out of the gate.
Not out of the gate.
Smart. You were like, he's back, this is the new status quo, at some point we will get there. So
yeah, and it ended up a very weird, it was like magic.
Yes.
It was strange. But anyway, Daredevil is very fun. There's a lot that's fun to think about and talk about with him because he is so complex. Yeah. He feels real in a way that a lot of other heroes do. And I think you did a really good job in this book of somehow making it feel real, even though it's nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, Matt is messy. He's a messy character in his professional life. Obviously, he's a lawyer that can tell, like, if someone on the stand is lying. He has all these tools and advantages that are unfair. He's not a great friend to his law partner. Even Foggy Nelson is like the most loyal guy and the nicest guy. He's not great in terms of his personal relationships. He is self-involved.
He has some blind spots.
Yeah.
You could say.
He's got some. He's not. Justice is his main priority, and he will sacrifice anything else, any personal, professional relationship, in that quest, and that's admirable. But also, like, dude, these are your friends.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big like Marvel Universe credos is don't date Matt Murdock.
Right.
It's always.
And that's a plot there too. He has a new love interest, and you're almost optimistic. You're rooting for Matt. You're like, maybe this is the time you don't screw it up. But there's also the weight of the loss of his longtime love, Karen Page, who was killed, by Bullseye, and that happened in a comic, and so that's referenced in the novel. And so it's a lot about. It also grapples with his Catholic guilt. He's a very Catholic character, and that's a big element of what he does. So, yeah.
I mean, we have that's true. That's a whole nother layer. Is that he's a deeply religious guy too. So, why don't we see if there are any questions?
Sure.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask about Daredevil or the book or Alex? All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Is Blind Spot in the book?
He is not. Sorry.
He is not. But he's great. He's very cool.
I do love the character. I wanted to strike a balance where there are cool cameos, and I'm assuming you're a fan because you mentioned Blind Spot, where folks like us would be like, oh, cool, there's Black Tarantula, or there is Elektra, and she references wearing the Daredevil costume, but also have it be open enough where a casual reader can understand, and then be introduced to Daredevil and have an idea of what they want from this world.
Blind Spot was Matt's like protege for a
Yeah.
while. Like he's a young sort of Chinese immigrant who is trying to get his act together. So anyway, you got a question?
Yes, for both of you, I guess. When it comes to writing characters like Daredevil and also prose and in the comics, do you ever explore Manhattan and the boroughs to get a feel for the various rooftops and everywhere where they're running around?
Yeah, I mean, the Hell's Kitchen that has been part of Daredevil lore is very different from Hell's Kitchen today.
Long ago.
But I think you want to evoke a certain New York vibe. So like kind of that 70s gritty New York vibe is really what you want to relay while having it still feel modern. So, I think there's a line in there that says, Hell's Kitchen has changed a great deal, but you want that hard-boiled noir feeling. In terms of research, I've lived in New York for 20 years now, so I feel like I've walked those streets, not to get all poetic about it, but yeah, it's definitely, you pick up little things as you just live your life, and that feeds into the book. Like there's references to places that I'm sure people in this neighborhood will recognize when they read the book.
Yeah, I mean, I've almost have 30 years in New York, and you just, that's I've lived here longer than I've lived any place, and you just kind of know it, like I know what the Empire State Building looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know. We all probably do. That's not a big one. That's not a very deep one. Anyway.
Penn Station.
Yes. Ooh, very, very good. But I think writing about New York is one of the things that makes it so fun to work in the Marvel Universe in general, because New York is, as any Marvel writer will say, New York is always a character in the books. And the New York of the Marvel Universe is constantly being destroyed and rebuilt, and people dressed as rhinoceroses are throwing cars at you and things. It's not always the best, but it's also kind of amazing.
And I think one of the things that really made Marvel different when Marvel, started out, in the 60s and Silver Age was that it's the world outside your window. Like you could see Spider-Man swinging by. There wasn't a Gotham City or a Metropolis. It was happening in the world we know. And so I think one of the goals with the book is to have it feel more grounded. And so that's why you also don't see Stiltman or Leapfrog or some of the sillier villains, because I wanted it to feel in conversation with the show, like have it feel like it could happen.
I was actually walking through Times Square today, and I saw Spider-Man. So it really is.
Didn't see Thor?
No, did not see it. All right, any other questions? Yep.
I wanted to ask about going from writing comic books to writing a novel. I know that when it comes to writing a comic book script, you have to describe everything that happens in each panel and page so that the artist actually, draws it and doesn't forget it and leave it out. I was wondering how it helped you in terms of writing a novel as opposed to writing a comic book script.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I like to say is that when I work on a comic, it's like you're in a band. You're giving enough to the artist that they can visualize and do all these things. They're the director, they're the costume designer, they're the set designer, and you're giving them enough to direct the movie. With prose, it's all on your shoulders, and one thing that's different is you're in Matt's head in a way that you really aren't as much in the comic. You are and he's the viewpoint, so you see everything through his eyes and his experience. So I think that's the challenge. Like, how can you tell a story with this guy that has these abilities and these powers and kind of keep the mystery going? Whereas with comics, you're handing off the ideas and the visuals to the artists, and they're doing the legwork, the heavy lifting. Like you can say an army storms a castle, double-page spread, and they have to draw it for 2 weeks. They'll be drawing it. So that's a division of labor.
Yeah, you try to be judicious about
you
asking for
don't
the
do
army
that.
so you can ask them. But just to elucidate a little bit on what I mean, in a lot of ways, comics are. It's just a different. It's like pulling focus. Like in a film. Like I feel like the thing that I'm very, very dialed in when I'm writing a comic script is the emotional content of the scenes, right? Like the artist always has all the dialogue ahead of time, so they know what's happening in the scene, and I would do a lot of talking about this person's angry here, they're confused here, they don't know whatever the thing might be, they're afraid. Because the artist is like, has to draw the character, it's like they're actors. And getting the emotional content right of what the characters are doing or thinking or feeling or punching is I would say 80-90% of it.
Yeah, I think the big difference is with comics, you're writing for the artist to interpret your words. With prose, I'm writing for the reader to create that visual in their mind. And so I'm giving you enough to create that picture in your mind. And the challenge with a character like Daredevil, who's so visually established, like people have seen him in comics and movies and TV shows, is how can you give it to the reader in a unique way that feels fresh?
I mean, I also like when I'm writing novels because it gives me the opportunity to like really focus on like a moment in a way that you couldn't really do. It's like, you know, Proust's meddling, right? Like he wrote the whole book about what that was like to taste that cookie that you remember when he was a kid. And so you can do weird tricks like that when you're writing prose that would be extremely difficult to pull off in comic. You kind of can, but it's usually don't. And so the ability to sort of zoom in, pull out, do this, like play with the audience's expectations and moments in prose is fun.
And I tried to make it evoke a comic in that each chapter feels pretty fast. There's a lot of chapters, and I like to think the book moves fast, but also each chapter ends on an image. In many instances, it ends on an image of something happening that will carry you into the next chapter. So you could treat the chapters almost like issues if you want, but I wanted to evoke the pace of like a monthly comic.
Yeah, I try to do the same thing. I think it's just like how we came up.
It's just how we're wired,
Most of the time when you read, almost always when you read a comic book, the last page will have a huge moment that doesn't resolve the story and is more like a gigantic cliffhanger in one way or another that makes you realize, oh, you gotta come back next month for the next issue, because they're periodicals, they keep going, and the comics companies go out of business, as they often do, if people don't keep coming back every month. So, any other questions? Oh, we got two. All right, you go ahead.
There's a big moment happening right now for Daredevil between the prose novel, between the new series at Marvel Comics, being Born Again. So with all these eyeballs on the character, is there a lesser known take on Matt that you two would like to recommend?
Oh, that's interesting.
I loved your run. Everyone should read Charles' Daredevil.
Yeah.
I really like Mark Waid's take, which I think sometimes gets overlooked because it is a little lighter, but there's dark moments in there, and I think he really takes the character in interesting directions, but I think sometimes it gets overlooked because it's bookended by Charles' run, which is very noir and kind of reestablishing Daredevil in many ways, and was preceded by a very dark kind of noir take. I also think a lot of the pre-Miller stuff people tend to overlook because they think it starts, like we said, it starts with Miller, but Steve Gerber had a very weird run there. Mark Wolfman had a nice run there and introduced Bullseye, and Gene Colan drew Daredevil for like 30 years, basically. Some beautiful stuff.
I mean, I would echo everything. I mean, one of the great things about Daredevil is that you can't go wrong. Like it's all, there's no bad ice cream, right?
Yeah,
Like,
he's been very blessed.
It's like that. There's every writer and artist team on that book has been spectacular, and it's now at the point where it's kind of known as a proving ground, and it's intimidating to get the Daredevil gig because so many people have like knocked it out of the park in ways that are like just wild to see that the way that characters come on to, writers and artists come onto this character and find ways to reinvent Daredevil and make him relevant to the moment in which he's being written. It's both inspiring and also very intimidating. Mark Waid's run, which preceded mine, won like lots of Eisner Awards, which are like the Oscars of comics, and he had done this really revolutionary take that was kind of like both fun and swashbuckling, but also very dark at the same time, and it was like masterpiece stuff. And so then they're like, okay, man, here you go.
I'm sure we both had similar moments where it was like, who, me?
Yeah.
This is happening. Yeah. I will also mention Andy Nocenti's run.
That's the one I was going to say. I got sidetracked.
Spoiler alert, and Dan Chichester's run, which is him and Lee Weeks, who's like John Buscema reborn, basically, in the way he draws. Just like a great, very gritty artist, grounded artist. They did an arc called The Fall of the Kingpin that I was thinking about a lot while writing this book, because it's a response to Born Again, and so those are kind of two sides of the coin.
Yeah, and in Annie's run, she also had Typhoid Mary, who is a in your story. Yeah, exactly. But the thing that I liked about what Ann Nocenti did was she was not afraid to get. First of all, she was the first female writer to write the character, and she was on it for a good long time and did a lot of really, really weird and like psychedelic and strange, and like she just did really interesting things, and again reinvented the character in a way that it hadn't really been done before. So we basically have answered your question by saying read every issue. But we will vouch for it. I mean, that's good advice. So you had another question.
I just wondering if you could maybe talk about the villains a little, maybe in terms of grounding, because I mean, Daredevil is kind of a street level hero. I mean, he's not Thor, but these villains like Bullseye, Punisher, Kingpin, I mean, they're killers, really. Like they're almost, I mean, they're really street level. Did that help in terms of like the crime novel?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of my favorite parts about the book was writing those. There's scenes, obviously Matt is defending the Punisher, and so there are a lot of scenes in prison where Matt and Frank are having very, Clarice, Hannibal Lecter type conversations, and those were just fun. And those were really the ones where I felt like kind of most in conversation with the show, because those characters are done so well on the show, among many things. But in the book, I had a blast just having those characters play off each other, because it felt very, like you said, like very grounded and gritty. But that was my rule of thumb, like treat the characters as if they were really happening, and treat it as grounded a way as I could. And so that's why characters like Kingpin are very believable. We kind of see that in our own day-to-day. Characters like the Kingpin in power, abusing power, and characters like Bullseye are just terrifying killers. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really know the character well, but you both sort of mentioned the topical aspect and the roots of this in the 70s, and it's such a good time to be riffing on the 70s because there's so many parallels with you run with that. Like, so I don't know, do you think about just maybe a little bit more on the thematics of the book and relating to that time and to this time, and how you think about timelines?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a theme writer. I don't know if you are. I tend to realize after the fact what I was doing, like where my brain was working or what my theme was. But now looking back on the book, it's really about Matt trying to think about how far he's willing to go to get justice and what is his definition of justice. And there's a big fork in the road early on in the book where he could have washed his hands and said, okay, Punisher's going to go away forever. He's already been convicted of a million things. The Kingpin's dead. I can just deal with other stuff. And that would have been the easy path, but Matt as a person and as a character and as a superhero never takes the easy path, for better or worse. And so I wanted to use the theme of justice and seeking justice and how we seek justice as a way to introduce people to the character.
I had a Daredevil story come out just last month, last year, and then it was collected last month, called Cold Day in Hell, which is about an older Daredevil, older member, he's like 65 years old, and his powers are gone because they're radiation based, and then a dirty bomb goes off in Hell's Kitchen, and he gets to be Daredevil again for 3 days. But the city that he has inherited basically is sort of where the city is headed in the novel. I think it's decayed, it's blighted, people have lost a lot of hope, and it ends up being something that Matt directly is fighting against, because there's a quote from my Daredevil run where he says, "I cannot see the light, so I will be the light," and that informs all of my writing on Daredevil. But the fact is, like, Daredevil is so rich and sort of robust as a character that you can have that take, you can have this take, and they both work really, really well. So for me, like, it's being not exactly an icon of hope, because that's not really what Daredevil does. He's not really trying to inspire. He's just the person that you can, like, he's making the world better. You can rely on him. He will be there and he'll get it done somehow.
Yeah, and he's interesting because he's complicated and he's flawed and he's made mistakes and he's trying. It's relatable. He's trying his best to succeed and find justice, but on the way, he's leaving a lot of wreckage, and that's kind of a metaphor for life in many ways.
Yeah. I feel like we had another question. Yeah.
So going back to writing craft for a little bit, Alex, I know you work both in original novels and also novels in the world of IP. I won't ask you what you prefer, but I wanted to ask about your difference in strategy or difference in approach between original and IP. Like, from the outside, it seems like the difference between playing with your own action figures that you can throw against the wall and set on fire if you want, or borrowing your friends' action figures that they can't be mad at you when you give them back.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to describe it. With IP work, like Star Wars or Daredevil, you get to play with the toys, but you're in a sandbox and you can't break the toys. stories. You can play with them and have a fun time, but that's it. And you have to do it with care and with the realization that you're just one kind of etching on the wall. Somebody else is going to add to it, and there's going to be more. And you're part of this long tapestry of people that get to write these characters. Whereas with my own stuff, you know, if I want the car to blow up, the car will blow up. You know, unless my editor's like, this is narratively bad. And I think whenever you're doing work for hire, you're part of a team. So you have to really like make sure your story is laid out well in advance. You know, I'm a plotter. I write with a very detailed outline, so that works well for me. But I know a lot of writers that just start with a blank page and go from there, and maybe won't be as suited for like work for hire work. So you have to be willing to take the notes and be easy to deal with, and I hope I'm easy to deal with. But you also have to be open to the realization that these are not your characters and you're kind of renting it.
I obviously agree with all that because I do a lot of the same sort of split between IP and my own novels. But the thing that I think is an upside when you're writing IP is that you are literally standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like all of you are able to weaponize all of the goodwill that these characters have generated over the decades they've been in existence. I mean, Daredevil came in 1964, and so we're 62 years in on Daredevil, and there's been, as we've explained at length, there are a lot of really, really good Daredevil stories. So people, there are, I would assume, millions of people who will pick up this book just because it's a Daredevil story without having any idea who you are, because they've enjoyed, there's millions of copies, right? Because Daredevil has that oomph that's kind of built in, and that's something that you can use with Star Wars, with lightsabers, with Wolverine, with those claws. Like there's inherent meaning that in some ways means you have, like the toolbox is different in a way that's very useful.
It's also a different experience. Like when you're creating something completely out of nothing, it's cool and it's great because it's yours. But I will admit it was really neat to be typing Daredevil said for the first time. Or that there's a moment where he goes into Ben Urich's office and he's having a conversation and Ben is smoking a cigarette, or he's not smoking a cigarette, but having a conversation, and it felt very Frank Miller, like very much like I was like, okay, we're doing the thing. Or this, Charles and I have written a lot of Star Wars, and there was the first time I wrote Darth Vader's dialogue, I was like, pretty cool. And that's something you maybe can get out of your own stuff in some way, but no, it's not the same.
Yeah, it hopefully someday it will be the same for both of us when we are selling millions and millions of copies, but we'll see. All right, other questions? Anybody? Okay, I think if you do, raise your hand. But so I think we can like start moving towards the wraps. You can sign books and stuff. So
thank you, Charles. It was great. Good work.
We're not done yet. I got a few more things.
Giving you your flowers.
So the book ends in a way that could, like, Daredevil doesn't die. You know, the city is not destroyed. Like there are things in it that suggest, at least to me, that there could be more stories in this little Daredevil verse that you generated here with Anime Writing. Would you want to go back? Would you want to write another Daredevil novel, or have you had enough?
No, I would be happy to do another one. I think Daredevil is one of those characters that I could write for a long time. You know, Daredevil, Spider-Man, the X-Men. But I think there is another idea I have in this like narrative. If it happens, that's really like up to other things. But yeah, I'd be happy.
Well, that's great. Let's hope you do. Yeah. All right, Alex Segura.
Thank you, Charles.
Everybody. Thank you so much.
We are going to shift Alex so that he can sign books. I don't know where I'm shifting, you won't figure it out.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're comfortable seated, that is fine, but you can also kind of line up. If you have your book, I know a couple of folks came in a little late. If yes, that was you, please meet me over here so I can check you in. And if you've already gotten your book, hand you your book. That's it, you can't be. Oh.
Thanks for